Welcome to the Tanya Acker Show. If you are lucky, one or both of these two things are true. You either have an older person or people in your life who you care about and perhaps take care of, and you yourself will grow older. So how do we do a better job of taking care of an aging population? And how do we do a better job of taking care of the caretakers of that population? Here to talk with me about that is Carlene Davis. She is the co-founder of SAGE. That stands for Sistahs Aging with Grace and Elegance. Here I am with Carlene Davis, and thank you for being here. Welcome to the podcast, Carlene. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Tell us a little bit about why you co-founded SAGE.
Well, the origin story is when I was in my mid-20s to early 30s, I was a caregiver, a care partner for both my mother and my father. I was an only child. And so after they passed away, I started thinking, wow, well, what about your aging journey? Because, you're not married, you don't have children, you don't have sisters and brothers. And so that meant that it was going to be really important to create an intentional community around aging. And so I had a friend who had a different scenario, but a similar need to think about, well, how are we going to build an intentional community? And so it actually just really started from bringing friends together to have conversations. And initially, we were going to focus only on single Black women. And then our married friends were like, well, don't leave us out. I don't know if I'm going to want my husband by then. I don't know what my kids are going to do. So we started having more formal conversations that were called Celebrating the Aging Journey. And so that's really kind of the evolution of how Sistahs Aging with Grace and Elegance came to be.
It's so important, I think, as you just point out, to be intentional about it, especially for those of us who, like me, really went down a child-free path. I think that there was once upon a time when people are like, my kids are going to take care of me. And a lot of folks still embrace that. But, they think their children are going to take care of them. But what if you went through life not wanting to have children or not being able to have children, whatever the case may be? So what does SAGE do? How do you support people in this intentionality?
Right. So as I mentioned, one of our core programming ways of being a community is or are celebrating the aging journey. So we have these convenings in Los Angeles, Oakland, Sacramento, where we bring Black women together in a safe, culturally specific, and culturally affirming space to talk about these issues, to remove the stigma of talking about aging. And really what's funny is when we first kind of came up with the title Sistahs Aging with Grace and Elegance, some folks were like, well, do you want to have something with aging in the name? And it's like, yes, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to have aging because we're removing the stigma. And so the core of it is really creating these spaces to have these conversations, to bring information and tools and resources to make our SAGE sisters aware of the resources that are available to them in the community, to really start thinking about and researching, well, how will I be cared for? Well, what is the cost of care? To start thinking about, well, have you worked on your advanced care directive, right? Have you created a will and a trust? How are you protecting your assets that you work so hard for? Should you need to think about how you use those assets as you age? And so it's really around creating access to information, education, knowledge, resources, and really creating a mind shift in how we look at aging. And so, I have this theory of change is that we need to return to our ancestral tradition of looking at aging as a collective rites of passage and not as an individual test of mettle. So I fully believe that aging should be a community journey, not an individual journey.
And it seems that for so many communities throughout the ages, it had been, and that it's only very recently that it seems that, a lot of the time, the aging community is often sort of left to fend for itself. I want to circle back to what you said about cultural specificity. Tell us what you mean by that and why you believe it's important.
Say Sistahs is by, about, and for Black women. We do not, even though we get pushback, and we're, as is always the case, actually, other communities don't necessarily get pushback, but, our work is centered on the experiences of Black women, and then increasingly with some new projects with Black men as well. And that's because our social determinants of health, our outcomes related to aging, demand a specific focus on meeting the needs of our community.
I think it's worth pointing out that there's been a significant amount of research. I'm not going to go into it here, folks, but you can check the data. We're not making this up. There are different ways in which the healthcare community sort of engages with Black women. Our pain is less often diagnosed. We assume that we've got these incredible pain tolerances. Outcomes for women who are having children are sometimes much more negative. And so it is not a huge leap to assume that some of those same disparities exist in the aging population. What are some of the things that the members of your community talk about in that respect and in that context?
One is really not feeling respected when they try to have conversations with their healthcare providers. And then on the other end is oftentimes immediately going to over medication when there might be other more holistic options to possibly explore. And then another on the other end is not telling you about all of the possible options that are available to you. And so just kind of the cumulative effect of all of those different points, depending on where and how you enter the system as a whole, means that we have worse outcomes related to our health issues and our health conditions.
I think also, you talked about some of the challenges as a caretaker, and you, a person who was responsible for looking after both of your parents. Talk a little bit about that, because I also think that, there are so many ways in which we can extend life so people are living longer, but they're not necessarily living better, which means that we've got more and more people who, as they get older, may need more help from us. What are some of the challenges that caretakers have to really be mindful of and prepared for?
So, one of the first is, and what we try to encourage within our states as a community is, please have these conversations with your family ahead of time. As difficult as it may be to think about, kind of our end of life care journeys, the more that you get your kind of family and whatever family means to you, whatever your network means to you, so that one, you yourself kind of understand what your own end of life care or transitioning towards end of life, what's important to you, and you're able to communicate it with your loved ones or whomever may be doing caregiving. It's having those conversations early. Then the second is, you may want to live at home, to live out your final days at home. And that is your right to be honored. At the same time, it's important to recognize then what are you asking of your caregiver? What does that mean? So often caregivers, particularly women, particularly Black women, particularly daughters, might have to end up um, losing some of their own economic stability because the demands of caregiving means that they're not able to manage both their own job and caregiving. And then that creates another scenario down the line when it may be your turn to be in need of caregiving. And then what are the resources that you have? It can be, this wasn't my case. So in terms of being isolating, but it can be very isolating to be a caregiver. And so often, so many caregivers don't focus on their own mental needs, emotional needs, psychological needs, and healthcare needs. And so that's another factor to think about in terms of caregiving and the impact that it can have on the caregiver.
Girl, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. The daughters, like like I have, a number of friends who found themselves in situations where they had to look after parents who were aging and had some challenges, and women friends, and a few of them, they have brothers, but it does more often than not. And again, I'm not giving short shrift to the men out there who put in the work, but it's interesting to me that you said that because it's something that I've observed. Why is that? Where do you think that comes from?
Okay, now Tanya. Now that's a whole nother.
That's a whole thing.
That's a whole.
It's a whole thing.
That's a whole different broadcast, a whole different conversation. Okay, so what I want to do first is I want to lift up that yes, there are men who are and have provided care. So I want to lift that up to the brothers.
Lifting it up.
Supporting, a dear friend right now, Mark, who is, going through that journey. He's also an only child. My friend Lisa, her partner Maurice, was a dedicated caregiver. So I just want to lift that up. And it is the case, and this is not unique to Black families, just across the board, daughters tend to provide the caregiving, twice as much caregiving as men, more hours than men. It is just the case. And so, like I said, that's a whole nother sociological conversation, which I would love to,
There's like a whole podcast just on that.
That is just a whole podcast on its own. And so what I would say that means for Black women and daughters is that, if you have, and in our community, it might not just be your mother or your father. It might be your aunt that that it is kinfolk, right? We take care of kinfolk and we define who kinfolk are. And so if you have kinfolk whom you love and whom you would, take care of, start thinking about that. Start having those conversations now.
Those conversations are both important and sometimes uncomfortable. Going both ways. Like I remember, and I'm very fortunate. Thank you, God, that I've got both of my parents, and they are both healthy and lucid. But they are growing older. And my father, a little while ago, said to me, "Look, you're a lawyer. I'm making you, you're the executor of my healthcare directive. And I'm telling you this right now, that I don't want, when it's time for me to go, if the brain is dead, pull the plug." I forget how he put it. But he didn't want, anything, to extend life beyond the point where his brain was still working.
Yeah.
And he said, look me in the eye and tell me that you are going to carry out my wishes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, Daddy, I don't even I think we were playing cards, Carlene. I was like, Daddy, I don't even want to talk about this right now. I will cross that bridge when I get to it. And he was like, no, you're going to look me in the eye and tell me that right now. Because, he was like, when the moment comes, I can see you saying, I'm going to try to pull out all the stops. We are going to find a way. He was like, just, and it was really important to him that I give him that security. And then I let him know that I was going to comply with those wishes. And it was hard even to think about, Carlene. I don't even it was hard to think about being in that moment.
Yes.
And so I think what you're saying is that we have to really push ourselves and push those conversations and have them before we get there.
Absolutely. So I think it was this past summer, time is passing, but we had one of our Celebrating the Aging journeys in the Bay Area. And that theme was life, leaving, and legacy. And the entire time together focused on kind of preparing for end of life care. We brought in a death doula. We brought in a colleague, the grave woman, who did a kind of grief art workshop, thinking about who we've lost and where we hold that in our bodies, but to really begin to create a space for us to breathe, first of all, and acknowledge that this is part of the circle of life. It is the part of circle of life.
If we're all lucky, as I said in my intro, we will either get there. We will get there at the end of a ripe, long life, and or we will look after people who are getting there. Again, something else in that really big statement you made about caregiving and caretakers. Especially if you are single, especially if you are working, especially if you're not independently wealthy and don't have a big nut, it can drain you. I mean, not just emotionally, but financially. So if people are in a position of having to be the caregiver, what are some of the things they can do to make sure that they and their family member are getting the resources they need? Because, a lot of people may not even know about, the person's benefits or what, resources they have. How do people kind of make sure that they are accessing that information?
So it goes back to, you have to have the conversation. You can't make assumptions about what your loved one has or does not have. And you can't, okay, here is one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions that is very important to disabuse folks of, is that many people make the assumption that Medicare is going to pay for caregiving. And Medicare does not pay for caregiving.
Nothing at all?
There's a small section, kind of under Part B, that pays for some home health services, but that's not for someone who needs it in an ongoing way. So I just want the audience to know, do not make the assumption that Medicare pays for caregiving, because I think that's in the back of folks' head, Medicare will pay for that. Well, actually, no, Medicare does not pay for that. If you are very, very low income, then Medicaid can pay for what they call in-home supportive services, but that's for very, very low income. So that's not for kind of the majority. So even if you make $1 more than the eligibility for Medicaid, you might be able to get on Medicaid, but you're going to have a share of cost that you may not be able to afford. So care in general is not affordable, and it is just subsidized by both the financial and sweat equity, generally of family caregivers and generally of women.
I think that was a really important note to bring up about Medicare, because I think you're right. I think a lot of people just assume that Medicare is this thing that will look after you and look after your folks and your people when they get older. And that just isn't always necessarily the case. So what can people do to prepare? Is there like insurance people can buy in advance? What do those insurance products look like? Are they affordable? Tell us a little bit about that.
So, for those who can, purchasing long-term care insurance is one way to help support your kind of cost of care. I purchased long-term care insurance when I was in my 40s, early 40s, in part because of my own experience. Now, the issue is that there are not a lot of long-term care insurance providers in the state. And the cost of care can be prohibitive. So, again, you want to start researching to see if you have access to long term care insurance. If you work for the public sector, many public sector entities offer long term care as a benefit that's at a reduced rate because it's a group rate. So if you right now, you work for the city, the county, the school district, explore what are the long-term care options. And Tanya, I also want to bring in here some costs that I think that folks also don't recognize. So like, oh, okay, well, maybe then, we'll put mom and dad, in a assisted living facility or in a nursing home, or if there's Alzheimer's or other dementias, maybe a memory care facility. But in the state of California, the costs for those facilities range anywhere from $5,000 a month to like $12,000 a month, right? And once again, if you are very low income, Medicaid will pay for that. But if you're not, that's a cost that's going to have to come out of whatever the family pot is. So that's why it's so important to do the research and to kind of have a plan and to think more collectively, right? Like, can we, can we share? You need to care, what are the things? How can we look at this from a more collective to leverage like kind of our like combined resources? How do we think about this differently?
So that maybe, if you're again are thinking about this intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
you and a group of your friends will have a plan so that at some point, especially if you all are around the same age and perhaps your parents are around the same age and are sort of similarly situated in
Mm-hmm.
terms of their needs, you could share somebody. You can
Mm-hmm.
take that $5,000 to $10,000 a month and then maybe split it, and then at least you all are, you're part of a pod. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because the intentionality becomes so important, because most people, Carlene, tend to fall between, there's that big space between, you are very, very poor and you will
Mm-hmm.
get some help. I will never say that very poor people in this country get all of the resources they need.
No, it may not.
But that, because I don't think that's true, but you will get more help. And if you're very, very rich, you don't need it.
You don't need it.
You're
But most of
self-insuring.
us,
Yeah. Most people are in that wide space where whether or not it comes to financial aid for being unemployed, or like aid for looking after parents, they fall in that within that really wide gap where, they're not poor enough to get more help and they certainly aren't rich enough to take care of it on their own. So sort of thinking about
that they
these
refer to
strategies
that
is
as the
important.
missing middle.
Yeah, missing middle. Well said. That's very well said. How do you think that we can do a better job of supporting caretakers? Because, even if it's not just the daughters, and let's say you've got a family with like many siblings, doesn't there always just tend to be one person who handles the stuff? How do we support them better?
So in different communities, there are resources. So like here in Los Angeles, there is the Family Caregiver Resource Center, which has different support groups, access to information, sometimes even respite care dollars, which means that you can receive funding to have maybe someone else, provide and care and watch your loved one, so you can take a day off, so you can focus on your own mental health. Um, and there are in California these family caregiver resource centers in every county or kind of groups of counties. There is a family caregiver resource center. So if you find yourself becoming a caregiver, one of the first suggestions I have for you is to find out and about the family caregiver resource center in your area. And those services are not based on your income. So it's not means tested, which is very, very important. So that's an action. Anyone who finds themselves becoming a caregiver is to seek out those resources first, because what happens is sometimes once you get into the depth of caregiving, then you don't take the time because you're in it. You're so in it that you don't stop to say, well, what do I need to do to take care of myself? But if you start there before you even get fully in the depths, then you can find supports, you can find information about resources so that you're kind of better tooled to be on this journey.
Before you go, Carlene, I want to ask you about something you said at the very outset, which is that for a long time, there were so many communities where we treated aging not as a burden or as an illness, but as a proper rite of passage.
Absolutely.
How do we do a better job of providing our aging community and the people that we love and our families and our friends? How do we do a better job giving their process and their journey the respect that it deserves? How do we do better?
There are a couple of suggestions I have. One is self-promoting, and I'm going to self-promote it, but I just work with spearheading an initiative called the Sankofa Elders Project, and we went on this journey with elders over a course of the year, and they developed a Black Eldering Bill of Rights, which is like a community manifesto for the care and belonging of Black elders that outlines kind of 9 core principles that think about what does it mean to kind of honor elderhood. So that's www.blackeldering.com. And the reason I say that is because it's a place for you to start. It's you can download those Bill of Rights and start to have conversations in your family. And it's really important to have intergenerational conversations. And what I say is that being an elder is not only about your chronological number, right? It's really about being in an honored place in community. That's what elderhood is. And also starting to recognize at a young age, almost everyone is an elder to someone else. So when you're talking to a 5-year-old, a 5-year-old is an elder to a 3-year-old. A 12-year-old is an elder to a 5-year-old. An 18-year-old is an elder to a 13-year-old. And so I think we also need to expand this notion of what it means to be an elder so that everyone, no matter where they sit in society, takes on some ownership and accountability on what it means to be an elder and what it means to protect an elder.
Carlene, that was so beautifully said. Your organization is SAGE. Tell people quickly where they can find you and how they can avail themselves of these resources.
Yes. So Sistahs Aging with Grace and Elegance, and it's www.sagesistahs, SAGESISTAHS.org. And I already gave the Black Eldering. And then I also want to lift up California Black Women's Health Project, and that's www.cabwhp.org.
Carlene Davis, co-founder of Sistahs Aging with Grace and Elegance. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the wisdom. People really need to hear this. So thank you for giving us so much info.
And thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate you. Come back.